these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome. Thanks for joining me as we cover the most interesting news from last week and arming you with the facts, to include President Trump unleashing deep-sea mining for critical minerals, an attack in Kashmir, Pope Francis passing away, RFK Jr.'s ban on synthetic food dyes, and National Prayer Day. So let's get into it. On April 24th, President Trump issued an executive order directing federal agencies to expedite approvals for seabed minerals and exploration and mining within 60 days, aiming to strengthen U.S. critical mineral supply chains. The president made this move to counteract China's tariffs and export controls on minerals and materials like gallium and germanium, which are essential for semiconductor manufacturing. These semiconductors are used in everything from high-frequency chips, LEDs, batteries, fiber optics, you name it. China currently dominates the sector and, unless corrected, leaves the U.S. in a fragile position. This executive order directs federal agencies to expedite permitting for U.S. companies to explore and mine strategic minerals. Those include things like nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese, titanium, adamantium. Just kidding. In both the U.S. and international waters. Now, it also launches new seabed mapping initiatives, encourages collaboration with allies, and calls for evaluating the use of federal funds to strengthen domestic processing capabilities for these critical minerals. Even if you gather the material, remember, you still have to have the ability to process it. And that's actually where China has cornered the market. And we really need to catch up, and so do our allies. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Trump's executive order allows the U.S. to bypass the UN International Seabed Authority for mining in international waters. Now, this is going to raise legal challenges and likely maybe increase some geopolitical tensions with other countries. But here's what's not being reported. The administration estimates that U.S. waters contain over 1 billion metric tons of mineral-rich modules. Plenty of material for the near future until the United States diversifies its international supply chains for those materials. I'd encourage you to check out my podcast episode. It's called Why You Should Care a Lot More About Critical Minerals. It was with Dr. Michelle Foss, if you want to deep dive into that subject. I'll also add, I serve on the Committee on Energy and Commerce that deals with critical minerals. When we talk about critical minerals on the seabed, they're literally in these modules. They're just laying there. You don't even have to dig for them in many cases. So this is something that it's great the administration is pushing hard on this and making this a priority. Good job, President Trump. On other news, as many of you know, Pope Francis passed away. So the day after attending Easter Mass in St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis passed away after a long battle with pneumonia. Pope Francis served as head of the church for 12 years after Pope Benedict XVI resigned in 2013. Pope Francis was the first Latin American pope and the first non-European to hold the position in over 1,000 years. During his papacy, Pope Francis emphasized humility and simplicity, choosing more plain vestments and a silver ring of the fisherman instead of a gold one. He continued wearing the same cross he had used as a cardinal rather than adopting a more ornate version that was typically worn by popes. He also chose to live in a modest guest house rather than the traditional papal apartment. During his time as Pope, Francis prioritized interfaith dialogue. While he did not permit or endorse the liturgical blessing of same-sex unions, he consistently emphasized the importance of compassion and tolerance. The Vatican held a 3-day public viewing for Pope Francis, during which more than 250,000 people visited to pay their respects. His funeral was held last Friday, followed by a procession through Rome to his tomb at the Basilica of St. Mary Major. Next week, on May 7th, the College of Cardinals will gather in the Sistine Chapel and seclude themselves to begin the conclave to elect the next pope, a tradition that dates back to the 13th century, after Pope Clement IV's death in 1268, when it took nearly 3 years to choose his successor. Next week, we're recording a podcast with a conclave expert from Catholic University of America, so be on the lookout for that to drop soon and dive more into this process. Now, despite being perceived by some as too liberal in his criticism of President Trump, Pope Francis remained the spiritual leader of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics and a man devoted to serving God and the less fortunate. And that's a commitment that transcends politics and I think deserves some respect. Now on to other geopolitical news in Kashmir. Last Tuesday, an alleged proxy for the Pakistan-based terrorist group Lashkar-e-Taiba claimed responsibility for a terrorist attack in India, administered Kashmir. Now remember, Kashmir is administered by both India and Pakistan. There was an attack there that killed 26 people. Military clashes have since ensued, sharply escalating decades-long tensions between India and Pakistan, both nuclear powers, by the way, raising fears of the worst confrontation between the two rivals since 2019. Let's move into some details. According to Indian outlets, the militants opened fire on tourists in Pahalgam, Kashmir, killing 25 Indian nationals and one Nepalese citizen, making it the deadliest attack in India since 2008. The Indian government quickly blamed Pakistan for harboring and supporting the terrorists. Pakistan denies involvement, calling it a false flag operation. Worth remembering, remember where we found Osama bin Laden, hiding comfortably in Pakistan. Now, since the attack, India has responded by suspending the Indus Waters Treaty, expelling Pakistani military officials, canceling visa privileges for Pakistani nationals, and closing a key border crossing. The attack undermines India's claims of stabilizing Kashmir following its 2019 move to revoke the region's semi-autonomous status. That's a decision that allowed greater settlement, but worsened relations with Pakistan. India's response to the attack has been stronger than past incidents have, and further escalation definitely remains possible. The timing of the attack, coinciding with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance's visit to India, has led some to believe it was intended to draw international attention and destabilize the region ahead of a major Hindu pilgrimage. Vice President Vance offered condolences, and President Donald Trump reaffirmed U.S. support for India against terrorism. A little bit more background on this conflict. The conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir began in 1947, when Kashmir's ruler chose to join India after a Pakistani invasion, triggering the First Indo-Pakistani War and a UN-monitored ceasefire. The 1972 Simla Agreement formally established the line of control, but tensions escalated after India's 1974 and Pakistan's 1998 nuclear tests. Violence reignited in 1989 with Pakistan-backed insurgencies, leading to the 1999 Kargil War and a major terrorist attack like the 2008 Mumbai attacks. In 2019, a suicide bombing in Pulwama killed 40 Indian soldiers, prompting Indian airstrikes in Pakistan. Later that year, India revoked Kashmir's special constitutional status, fueling deeper unrest and worsening ties between the two nuclear-armed neighbors. So, keep an eye out for that one. Not going well over there. In better news, we're getting rid of these food dyes that everybody's been complaining about, and rightfully so. We seem to be the only country that feels it necessary to brighten up our Fruit Loops. So RFK Jr. is on top of it. Last Tuesday, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced an initiative to reform the food industry by eliminating petroleum-based food dyes from products by 2026. This is part of his Make America Healthy Again campaign. He said he would do it. He's doing it. Secretary Kennedy indicated this was a deal with major food manufacturers who are voluntarily removing these dyes. Honestly, they should, right? You would think it would make their process cheaper. So, I mean, it's a win-win. Healthier America, less food dyes. There's just not as colorful. Now, why though? Like, what's the problem here? Now, during his presidential campaign, Secretary Kennedy frequently cited research linking these dyes, commonly found in processed foods like candy, chips, cereals, to childhood obesity, diabetes, ADHD, cancer, and other health concerns. Secretary Kennedy believes phasing out these synthetic food dyes is a necessary step to protecting public health, particularly for children, and to hold food manufacturers accountable for the long-term impacts of their ingredients. FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary announced that the agency plans to phase out 8 particular dyes: blue number 1 and 2, citrus red number 2, green number 3, orange B, red number 40, and yellow 5 and 6. The announcement also relayed that the FDA would expedite the approval of natural alternatives that are already used by major food manufacturers in places like Europe. In other news, this is especially important for those of you in South Texas regarding the U.S.-Mexico water dispute. This is a long-standing one. Turning our attention back to Texas here, there's been a long-standing water-sharing tension between the U.S. and Mexico, and it's reached a critical juncture. So after years of Mexico falling short on its water delivery obligations under the 1944 treaty, a new agreement has finally been forged. This deal aims to address the immediate water needs of Texas farmers and ranchers while setting the stage for more reliable future cooperation. So, a little bit of background here. In 1944, the U.S. and Mexico signed a treaty to share water from the Colorado River and the Rio Grande. Under the agreement, Mexico receives 1.5 million acre-feet of water annually from the Colorado, while the U.S. gets 1.75 million acre-feet from the Rio Grande over a 5-year cycle. Now, Mexico hasn't held up its end of the bargain. With just a few months left in the current cycle, it's more than 1 million acre-feet short, leaving South Texas farmers quite literally dry. The region's last sugar mill closed last year, and citrus growers are now facing the same crisis. To break the impasse, the U.S. and Mexico have reached a new agreement. Under pressure from President Trump, Mexico will immediately release over 56,000 acre-feet from the Amistad Reservoir, increasing monthly deliveries going forward and allow the U.S. to claim a larger share from 6 Mexican tributaries. For the first time, water from the previously unregulated Rio San Juan will also be included. So what did President Trump do exactly? In a Truth Social post last month, the president announced he would pause water exports to Tijuana and threaten tariffs to force compliance. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum responded by working with border state governors to meet U.S. demands while averting unrest at home. Now, the agreement doesn't fully resolve the shortfall, but it still marks the most aggressive enforcement of the 1944 treaty in decades and sends a clear signal that future water cooperation won't be taken for granted. Again, worth noting, this has been going on for years. Biden administration did nothing about it. Why? I don't know. Maybe because Texas is a red state, didn't vote for him. Thank you, President Trump. In other news, it's National Prayer Day. The National Day of Prayer is observed annually on the first Thursday in May by federal law, encouraging Americans to turn to God in prayer and meditation. I'm looking forward to participating tomorrow. Now, for this year, the 2025 theme for the National Day of Prayer is hope, and specifically pour out to the God of hope and be filled, which references Romans 15:13. The tradition began actually back in 1775 when the Continental Congress called for a National Day of Prayer and Fasting. Every president since 1952 has issued a National Day of Prayer proclamation. The date was officially set as the first Thursday in May by none other than President Ronald Reagan. That's it for the news. If you read nothing else, here's an interesting article for you. With the Pope being in the news, this week's If You Read Nothing Else comes from the New York Times. It's called The Dinner That Helped Save Europe. It details how a 1979 dinner between the U.S. Secretary of State and Pope John Paul II helped save Poland and Europe from a Soviet invasion. It's a good read. Thank you. See you next time.